Song for Cuba was produced by the National Film Board, and it was my first film in this country. It was an amazing experience for me to work with in a professional context with such a nice group of professionals. Before the War is different. It's a different project. It was produced last year. It's an independent film. It was my second experience directing in Canada. A very different story from the first one. But yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Rodrigo and my film was For Dorian. It was the first film that you saw tonight. It's so weird to see it here because it was made almost 3 years ago, and it was my thesis film when I was at Ryerson University. I graduated from Ryerson Film School, and it was a film that I did when I was in my last year. It was a very special film for me because it was the first time that I did narrative filmmaking, a fictional narrative, and as you can see, the subject matter is quite sensitive. So it was a very beautiful project when it comes to the research that we had to do and the amount of people that we met. So yeah, quite pleased that I could show it here tonight to all of you. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias por la invitación a este festival. Esta es una película que fue presentada en Concordia University por parte de los ejercicios que estuve trabajando.
I apologize beforehand for my translation. This is not something that I do. He thanks the festival for the opportunity of being here tonight, and this film was part of the exercises that he had to do when he was in Concordia University in Montreal.
Yeah. Yo traje de Cuba unas imágenes de archivo de los años 50, 56, 57 sobre una familia cubana de clase media.
This is archival footage that he brought from Cuba, and it was shot in the 1950s, 1956, 1957, 58.
Okay. Dime. Okay. Y las otras partes del filme son imágenes que yo filmé en Cuba y en la ciudad de Quebec.
The rest of the film is composed by images that he shot in Cuba and in the city of Quebec.
Y después de un laboratorio en Kinomada de 3 días, logré hacer esta película.
After a workshop, a 3-day workshop that he did in Kinomada, he finally managed to make this film.
Por eso es el título de improvisación.
And this is why the film is called Improvisation.
Por tanto, es un ejercicio de experimentación.
So it is an exercise of an improvisational exercise.
Donde mi objetivo fundamental era la temática del viaje y la metáfora del viaje y al mismo tiempo el movimiento a través de las imágenes visuales.
His primary focus or object was the metaphor that surrounds traveling.
El movimiento de las imágenes visuales.
And also concepts surrounding movement of the images.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias y espero que les haya gustado la película.
Thank you very much. I hope you all liked it.
Hi everyone, my name is Yanai, and I made Meaningful Things as an exercise for my editing class in Toronto Film School. And that's it.
If there are questions from the audience, I just witnessed a wonderful moment because generally when you work with filmmakers and they present their work, I have been able to translate them throughout our presentations, but this is just fantastic. It's the
that
first.
just happened.
Yes.
Yes. Could you talk about how long do you take to make the film and how was working with the actors, with the young actors?
Yeah, yes. But we were working a very tight deadline because, I mean, when you go into the real world, you can allow yourself all the time that you have but when you are a student, you have one school year to make this film, and it has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, you don't graduate and you fail and you have to go back to square one. So it was a very organic process. The actual filmmaking itself was only 3 weeks of pre-production, a week of production, and about 2 months of post-production. But the actual work that took to get to the filming was about 7 months. So it was 7 months of me meeting with teenagers with Down syndrome, parents of teenagers with Down syndrome, doctors, and writing draft after draft after draft and giving it to people who was involved with the Down syndrome community and kind of filtering the film. And at some point I had to let it go because many of them would say, oh, this is something that my brother with Down syndrome would totally do. And then someone else will come along and say, my brother would never, ever go near a stove. And at some point I had to understand that there is different spectrums of disability. And as long as a couple of people gave me the green light. So that whole process took about 6-7 months. But the filmmaking itself was very short.
I think condition of Cuban diasporic filmmaking, especially of our generation, as I call it, the post-2000 generation. When I was confronted with Rodrigo's film for the first time, I had already done some research, and I had found a kind of filmmaking among young people who lived off the island, who was in many ways looking back at home. So that's why the project is called Roots, that tie us to a place, and Roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, those new paths that we track as diasporic subjects in new places. When I saw for Dorian, I said, where is Cuba there, right? And
the art on
in the art, and that's the only because the art direction, there are many art pieces that are by Cuban artists. But if you don't know Cuban art, then how do you connect that? There's no direct link to the island, right? And there's no direct link to Canada except for the weather report. You know that Toronto will be cold and Saskatchewan is freezing there, but really there is no link to a place. And I realized, okay, then should that film be part of this festival? And I said, yes, why not, right? Rodrigo, I remember when I interviewed him for the first time, he said, I don't want to be known as a Cuban filmmaker so much because nationality is a burden on everyone, right? Nation states kind of constrict us. We cannot ignore them, but there are also filmmakers engaging in a more global form of filmmaking. He said, I want to be a concerned filmmaker, not necessarily a Cuban. So here in this, in what you just saw, I think you see some links to the homeland, but also you see filmmakers that just are creating. They are from Cuba, but we don't, as a curator, I didn't want to be obsessed with the idea of trying to find Cuba in those works, right? It's part of what we are, and that is also a Cuba, a new Cuba, the diasporic Cuba of our generation.
I don't want to put words on the other filmmakers, but I am concerned about storytelling and not so much from the actual place where I come from. I think the necessity of telling a story is an innate need of human beings, not Cuban human beings. Having said that, I am very proud of where I come from, and but again, it always comes back to the idea that I have the moment and how it makes most sense to execute it. This was for Dorian, and my next film is about an American Hungarian photographer who lives in New York, and my next film is about a Russian literature professor who lives in Cuba and deals with the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster. So its ideas are brought to me, ideas that I come up with. The Cuban film it's an original idea of my brother, who's also a filmmaker, and he brought it to me, and I was very excited to collaborate with him for the first time, and it will be the first time that I shoot in Cuba and that it is a Cuban subject matter. Again, it's something that comes organic, and it happens when it happens.
Well, in my case, I think Song for Cuba was a film that I owe to myself in first place, and that I owe to Cuba, and that I wanted to just to express and put out in order to keep going with my career and with whatever focus I'll put in my artist from now on that I live in Canada. Before the War, on the other hand, it's a film that apparently has nothing to do with Cuba, and I think the reason is because the stories, they morph, and film is something that you do with a group of people, and everybody in this group will bring something from their own background. And Before the War was, in fact, imagined for the first time when I arrived to Newfoundland and realized that it was a beautiful place that I couldn't enjoy because it was too cold. And it reminded me of some people that are so beautiful, but at the same time it's so hard to love. So that's how the place inspired their own story, and it could be a story that it could be placed anywhere. The war is nameless, but the fact that I did it in Cuba and I did it with people from different backgrounds, I think that makes it look like a non-Cuba, kind of work when it is.
En el punto de vista de la creación, o sea, cinematográfica, muchas veces hay como, por lo menos en mi caso, como unas búsquedas de sentimientos, ¿no? De sentimientos encontrados que tú lo traduces después a un lenguaje visual.
From my creative point of view, there is always that sense of emotions that collide and
Y en este caso yo había venido de Cuba hacía 3 meses, si acaso.
in this case, I had just arrived from Cuba 3 months prior.
Y los sentimientos que uno tiene son los típicos de haber dejado algo. Y,
And the feelings that I had were the usual feelings of having left something behind.
y que uno de alguna manera inconscientemente o conscientemente los apropia y intenta crear visualmente en imágenes una historia.
And somehow things that we consciously or unconsciously appropriate and kind of come to integrate who we are, and we try to use them in a way that create a story.
Este fue mi caso, ¿no?
This is my case.
Y entonces por eso es que de alguna manera muchas veces en la película a veces no lograba entender por cuáles sentimientos realmente o temáticas conceptuales estaba trabajando, ¿no?
This is why somehow in the film I wasn't quite sure about the conceptual themes that I was dealing with.
Pero en este caso ya después yo me di cuenta de que era el hecho de hacer una película en un país desconocido.
In this case, I realized that it was about making a film in a country that wasn't my own.
En paisajes totalmente desconocidos.
A completely unknown landscape.
Un lenguaje desconocido.
An unknown language.
Y eso es lo que uno provoca, particularmente fue lo que hizo que provocar esas imágenes un poco melancólicas.
And this is what triggers that I wanted to use these melancholic images.
Yo creo que es eso, es el hecho de que uno está en una etapa de transición.
This is it. It's the fact that I am in a transitional state.
Por la emigración.
Immigrational matters.
Y uno lo traduce de alguna manera, los sentimientos están traducidos en las imágenes.
And somehow feelings get translated into images.
Yo creo que es un ejercicio interesantísimo, es un ejercicio muy interesante para un cinematógrafo, para un filmmaker.
I think it's a very interesting exercise for a filmmaker.
El hecho de poder construir en imágenes y en sonido una película o un cortometraje fuera de su país.
To be able to construct a film, images and sound outside their own country.
Yo creo que es una experiencia importante y enriquecedora para cualquier cineasta que lo intente.
I think it's an important and enriching experience for any filmmaker, and I recommend that anyone who can tries it.
Y bueno, uno viniendo de Cuba, yo creo que no es que sea lo más grande, pero sí de alguna manera tiene una carga mucho más fuerte, ¿no? En mi caso personal.
And myself, especially coming from Cuba, and it's beyond this war, but in my case I did feel that it had an emotional connotation.
Eso de alguna manera es lo que yo traducí en las imágenes y en el sonido de mi cortometraje.
This is what I translated into the images and the sound of my short film.
Sin olvidar que es una experimentación también.
Without forgetting that it is an experimentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.